All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're cracking the code on what can be a really tricky part of medical coding, obstetrics. We are going deep into Chapter 15 of the ICD-10-CM, and that, covers the whole shebang, from that very first prenatal visit all the way through postpartum care. So if you've ever felt a little lost with the unique rules of OB coding, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get to it.
But before we get into any of the nitty-gritty, there is one single foundational rule that you absolutely have to know. I mean, if you get this one thing right, everything else just kind of falls into place. It is the key that unlocks all of OB coding, so let's put it right up front.
And here it is. This is literally the golden rule. Straight from the ICD-10-CM guidelines, it says that codes from Chapter 15 have sequencing priority. What does that mean? It means the codes for pregnancy, childbirth, and that postpartum period, they almost always have to be listed first, before codes from any other chapter. And this isn't just a friendly suggestion. It's what makes sure the pregnancy is recognized as the main reason for the patient's care.
So here's how we're going to break it all down for you. We'll start with those golden rules. Then we'll walk through the whole journey, pregnancy, the delivery itself, and the postpartum period. And at the end, we'll even get into how to code the actual procedures.
Okay, let's dive into our first section, the golden rules of OB coding. Think of these as the absolute non-negotiables, the principles that you just can't code without. Here's a super simple little trick to help you remember that golden rule. Every single code in Chapter 15 starts with the letter O. So just think to yourself, oh, the O codes need to go first. It's a really quick and easy mental check that'll help you get the sequencing right every single time. So the first question you've always got to ask is this visit happening because of the pregnancy? If the answer is yes, then one of those Chapter 15 O codes is going to be your main diagnosis. But what if the patient comes in for something totally unrelated, like a broken leg, and the fact that she's pregnant doesn't really change the treatment plan? Well, then the pregnancy is considered incidental. In that case, you'd code the broken leg first, and then add code Z33.1 to give the complete picture. All right, moving on. Let's see how these rules work during the pregnancy itself. Coding prenatal care is really all about digging into the documentation to see if we're dealing with a routine pregnancy or one that needs some extra attention.
You've basically got two main paths here. For a totally normal, uncomplicated pregnancy with just routine checkups, you'll use a Z34 code. Simple enough. But if there are any high-risk factors involved, say a history of preterm labor, or if the patient is of advanced maternal age, then you're going to use a code from the O9 category. And here's something absolutely critical to remember. You can never use those routine Z34 codes with any of the O codes from Chapter 15.
Okay, another detail that's absolutely crucial in OB coding, the trimester. For a whole lot of O codes, that very last character tells you which trimester the patient is in. And how do you know? It's all based on the provider's documentation of the weeks of gestation. So, just as a refresher, the first trimester is anything less than 14 weeks. The second goes from 14 up to 28 weeks, and the third trimester is from 28 weeks all the way to delivery. Getting this right is so important for accurate coding. And now for the main event, coding the delivery. This is where paying attention to the details in the medical record becomes everything. Let's start with the baseline, the definition of a so-called normal delivery, which is actually very strict. This is code 080. It's for a completely, totally, 100% normal and uncomplicated delivery. And it might sound straightforward, but let me tell you, the criteria to use this code are incredibly strict. We're talking a single live baby born at full term in the perfect head-first position with zero complications and absolutely no interventions. And when I say no interventions, I mean it. No forceps, no vacuum, not even an episiotomy.
This coding exercise is the perfect example of what I'm talking about with how strict that 080 code is. Just look at item number 4. At first glance, it looks good, right? Live born, full term, correct head-first position. But then you see those 3 little words, episiotomy with repair, and boom, that single intervention immediately means you cannot, under any circumstances, use the 080 code. So what happens when labor doesn't go so smoothly? Well, a common complication is something called obstructed labor. It's exactly what it sounds like. The baby is physically blocked from moving down the birth canal. This can happen for a few reasons. Maybe the baby's in a funny position, maybe there's an issue with the mother's pelvis, or it could be a scary condition called shoulder dystocia, where the baby's shoulder actually gets stuck.
And this picture?
It does a fantastic job of showing you exactly why that might happen. A normal delivery is what we call a vertex or head-first presentation. But you can see all these other positions, like breech, that's feet first, or transverse, where the baby's completely sideways. Any of these can lead to obstructed labor, and each one has its own specific code you have to use from the O64 category.
Okay, so the baby's here. We're done, right? Not so fast. The coding journey continues into what's called the postpartum period, and the weeks and even months after delivery have their own very specific rules and timeframes that you've got to understand to get the reporting right.
Now, this is super important. We have to get these two timeframes straight in our heads because they are not the same thing. The postpartum period is the 6 weeks right after delivery, but the peripartum period is a much wider window. It covers the last month of pregnancy all the way through 5 months after delivery. Knowing the difference is key for coding certain conditions correctly.
This timeline really lays it out visually for us. You can see delivery is day 0. Most typical postpartum complications, they're going to be coded within that initial 6-week window. But for some specific conditions, like peripartum cardiomyopathy, that's a weakness of the heart muscle that can develop. The coding timeframe extends all the way out to that 5-month peripartum mark, and you'd use code O90.3.
So what does this look like in the real world? Well, for a routine postpartum checkup, you'll probably use a Z code. If a complication pops up, like a hemorrhage, you'll use a specific O code, like O72. And then there's this other thing called sequelae. That's when a complication from the pregnancy causes a long-term issue that needs treatment down the road. For that, you use code O94, and it's always listed after the code for the condition itself.
Okay, up until now, we've been all about the diagnosis codes, the what and the why of the patient's condition. But to code the how, the actual procedures that are done during a hospital stay, we have to switch gears and look at a whole different coding system, ICD-10-PCS.
Right, so how do we code what was actually done? We use something called ICD-10-PCS, which stands for Procedure Coding System. It's used for coding procedures when a patient is in the hospital. And the whole logic behind PCS is to capture the specific goal of the procedure. In other words, you have to ask, what was the surgeon trying to accomplish? The key to cracking PCS is to forget about the name of the procedure for a second and just focus on one thing, the intent. This table gives you a great idea of how it works. Was the goal to take something out, like in an extraction? Was it just to cut or separate tissue, like in a division? Or was the goal to repair something? Figuring out that intent is always your first step.
And check this out. This is the official table of root operations just for obstetrics. You can see how every single term has a very precise definition. For example, delivery is defined as assisting the passage of the products of conception, but extraction is defined as pulling or stripping out the products of conception, often using instruments. See? The details really matter.
Okay, that was a lot, I know. So let's boil it all down to the 3 things you absolutely have to remember. Number 1, O. O codes go first, always. Number 2, the details in the documentation are everything. They're your roadmap. And number 3, for those inpatient procedures, always start with the intent. What was the goal? And this really brings us to a bigger, more important final thought. All of this detail, all these specific codes, it's about way more than just billing and getting paid. Every single code is a piece of data. And when you put millions of those pieces of data together, they tell a powerful story about maternal health. This data is what helps researchers track trends, identify risks, and ultimately improve care for mothers and babies all over the world.